2 weeks ago on a video, I talked about being a peacemaker. It was one of the lessons I had in a series on the Beatitudes. And we talked about being a peacemaker, that you are proactive about going out and making peace. And we talked about how most people are what we would call peacekeepers. They're conflict avoidants. They don't want to have conflict, and so they run from conflict. They let issues build up. They end up letting resentments build up in their hearts, and their relationships are usually pretty surface, and there's no real unity because they never get through the hard issues to get to authentic unity, and they don't have healthy relationships. Part of what I want for you is I want you to have healthy relationships. I want you to be a healthy person. And so following up with that lesson on being a peacemaker, and I hope you'll go listen to that if you haven't, today what I want to do is just give you some steps on how to have what I call a brave conversation or a crucial conversation with someone else. So here's what we're talking about. You're in relationship with someone. It could be your spouse, it could be a child, it could be a parent, it could be a friend, it could be a coworker. You need to have a difficult conversation. There's an issue that's come between you and you need to have a conversation. It's a crucial conversation. You need to be brave enough as a peacemaker to step into that conversation and have that conversation. So that's what we're talking about. The steps to having a brave conversation in a constructive, healthy, godly way. So you get to the issue, you address the issue, you get through the issue so you can have a really healthy, truly unified relationship on the other end. And I'm just going to go ahead and say this up front. There's 3 places I get this material. One, Peter and Jerry Scazzaro have written a book, and I got some of the material from there. Dr. John Townsend has written a lot of things on conflict resolution. Some of his material is in here. And then just my experience, both as a counselor that's counseled others, although I'm not a licensed counselor, and counseling I've received from my wife and I going to counseling. And so I just want to share some things, share my heart with you today. This is not inclusive. This isn't everything to be said on the topic. I just want to give you a few good points to think about when it's time to have that brave conversation. Okay, so let's get started. Number 1, you need to connect with the heart. You need to connect with the heart. You need to remember that the purpose of conflict resolution is to have a healthy relationship. You need to have a win-win. You need to walk out of the conversation not being right or wrong, but to have a win for both parties. This is very important in relationships to understand this. When there's a winner, there's a loser. When there's a loser, everybody loses in the relationship. So my goal coming out of a confrontation is not to win or be right or to have someone see things from my perspective. My goal is to address the issue so that we walk out with our relationship better because we've addressed the issue that has put a little distance in our relationship. And so I want to start on a heart-to-heart level. And that by nature means I can't walk into this conversation and be angry. How many times, and let's talk about marriage for a minute, how many times in your marriage have you gotten angry and you're gonna address the issue right now because you're mad, and you end up saying a whole lot of things you don't mean. You never really address the issues. You just say a lot of things and attacking the other person, and those words hurt and cause discord in the marriage and can put distance in the marriage because you're addressing it in anger. So the first thing you have to do walking into a relationship when you're going to have a brave conversation is you have to walk in connected at the heart, having addressed your anger separately going into the conversation. So let me just tell you how this works with my wife and I, and it works in business, it works with any relationship. If Alice and I are mad at each other and I'm angry, too angry to have the conversation, I just call a timeout and say, look, I'm too angry, I can't have this conversation, I don't trust myself to not hurt you, and I don't want to hurt you because I love you. So we're not going to discuss this right now. Give me 2 hours, give me 4 hours. I've got a couple of meetings. I'll be home at 5 this afternoon. Let's deal with it at this time. Now, most of us, because we're conflict avoidants, what we can do, if we're not careful, is the anger goes away and then we don't want to address the issue because we don't want to get stirred up again. We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. You can't be conflict avoidant. You have to address the issue, but you can't when you're mad. So what do? I can't do it right now, sweetheart, but I get home at 5:30. Let's talk about it then. Then by the time you get home, you have a little different perspective. You're not as angry. Maybe you're able to define the issue a little bit better. So it's very important up front to take care of those things so that you can have a productive conversation. So that's number one. Number two, you need to state the problem. You need to define the problem. You cannot address an issue and get a positive resolution if you don't know what the issue is. So the first thing you have to do is sit down with whoever you are in conflict with and state the problem. Now here's what I've noticed. I've noticed so many times when we get into disagreements with other people that we're not talking the same language. We're not even talking about the same problem. And in fact, sometimes if I'm talking to a couple and they're having a problem, or I'm talking to two businessmen and they're having a problem, I'll send them over to their corners and I'll ask them each to write out the problem. Can you imagine how often I come back with these two and they have written two separate problems on pieces of paper? They don't even see the problem. They don't even think they have the same problem. So the first thing you have to do if you're going to have positive conflict resolution is you got to get on the same page with the same problem. What you might find out is that you have two problems and you need to have two conversations. But you certainly need to clearly define the problem or you will never get to the place where you can solve the problem. And so this is a great technique and I really would encourage you to use this technique, and that is you tell the other person, I have this issue, here is the issue. I would write it down ahead of time. I would lay it out before them and say, now, do you understand this issue? Do you have the same issue? Do you think the issue is something else? And maybe you both need to separate and write it out and come and make sure that you're talking about the same problem or have the same issue. Okay? The second thing I want you to think about is, if I am having an issue with you and I'm having a confrontation or a brave conversation and I'm looking you eyeball to eyeball, here's kind of what we're saying. We're at opposite ends. You are the enemy. It's you versus me. But if I pull you around and sit you next to me shoulder to shoulder, and I write out the problem on a piece of paper and stick it in front of us, well, now it's not you versus me anymore. It's you and I as teammates versus the problem. And I know that might sound like a little thing, but I'm telling you it is huge. Because you don't want to be adversarial, you want to be a team. So when it comes time for those brave conversations, instead of sitting across the table, why don't you sit side by side and you write out the problem and stick it in front of you and say, now, as partners, as business partners, as parent and child, as friends, as spouses, we have a problem. The problem is the enemy. You and I are on the same team. Let's figure out how to address this problem. Okay, so that's number two, is you state the problem. Number three, very obviously, you own your own part. You own your own part. Let me tell you how to de-escalate an issue before the issue gets escalated. You walk in and you say, we have this problem, and this is the way I have defined the problem. I understand the problem. And let me just begin right here and say this. I'm so sorry for the part I play in this problem. And in fact, when I look at this problem, here's the part I think I play. I think I do ABC. Now, what have you just done? You've come from a place of humility. And if you'll remember from 2 weeks ago when we talked about being a peacemaker, you cannot be a peacemaker and be prideful. You cannot be a peacemaker and have impure motives. So the first thing I have to do is I have to walk in a place of humility and say, we've got a problem and I'm trying to be brave enough to address this problem with you. And here's the problem as I've defined it, but I want you to know, I take full ownership of my part of this problem, and I'm sorry, and here it is up front, and please accept my forgiveness. So that's number three, own your part of the problem up front. Number four, hear their side. Hear their side. Now remember, when you're having a brave conversation, it's not about getting the other person to agree with you, to lose the fight, to realize they're wrong and you're right. That is not the point of the conversation. The point of the conversation is what a healthy relationship on the other side of the issue. Because if we don't address the problem, what's going to build? Resentment. Resentment's going to build. So we're trying to get through this problem. So before we start talking about solutions, I've already told you what I think the problem is. I've already told you what I think my part in this problem is and have apologized for that. Now, I want to hear your perspective on this problem. I want to hear you tell me what you think the issue is. You know, right now in the world, we're in a world that is in a lot of conflict, and this needs to happen. And what I've encouraged my church to do and what I encourage you to do in the middle of this whole race relations issues that we're having right now is go sit down with someone of another race, and you guys know what the problem is. Listen to their perspective on the problem. Don't make judgments. Don't get in a fight. Just listen to their perspective. And when we do this, what we're doing is we're opening our heart up to understand. Seek to understand them before you try to solve the problem, because it's going to help give you a perspective that you need to come up with a solution that's a win-win for both of you. So make sure you hear things from their perspective. Now, a couple of warnings here. You need to watch out for a couple of stories. One, the victim story. Don't let them go to the victim place. The victim place is, it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault, it's your fault. And that's where you might have to gently say, you know what? I have already told you where my fault is in this, and maybe I have more fault than what I can admit. But we need you to step forward and look at your part of this problem. Don't let them play the victim. Also, don't let them play the villain. Don't let them play the villain. It's all your fault. It's all their fault. And just looking at somebody else and pointing the finger. You know what? At this point in the conversation, I've already said what I'm sorry for. You don't need to be blaming me, blaming others, playing the victim. Don't villainize someone else. Just own your part of the problem. You've done it. Now help them do it through asking good questions, through directing the conversation to make sure that they stay on task and they will address their part of the issue. And then just watch out for the helpless story, because we love to play the helpless. There's nothing I can do about this. You know, most problems have a solution, and we don't want to be helpless and say there's nothing I can do about this. Yes, there is something we can do about this, and we're doing it right now. We're talking about it. Let me hear your perspective. Don't play the victim. Don't villainize someone else or me. Don't tell me you're helpless and we can't solve this. We can. Let's do it. Now, conflict avoidant people love to change the subject, okay? So when they begin to change the subject, here's what you need to do. You need to give them a couple of minutes, and then you need to say, I hear you, but that's not what we're talking about right now, and you need to funnel it back. How many times, especially in marriage, do you start a fight and you end up fighting over the previous 8 things that you've bottled up? And so you're having a fight on 8 fronts at once. You can't do that. That's not productive, right? So when someone starts bringing up the past or bringing up someone else, I hear you, but that's not what we're talking about here. We'll get to that one next. Maybe we need to write that down as the next problem we're going to confront. But we stay on topic. That's the only way you're going to get through the problem, is to stay on topic, and that's your role as peacemaker, is to help them stay on topic. And then finally, I would say this. People resist confrontation in different ways. It can be rationalization, minimization, blame, denial, projection. Sometimes they shoot the messenger. You know the person you're going to have this confrontation with, this brave conversation. You probably know their tendencies. Be ready for that. Know they're going to respond that way, so it doesn't make you mad and you go down that trail. Just what? Listen, hear their perspective. Don't let them play villain or victim. Tell them we're going to come up with a solution, and keep them on course on hearing their perspective on their side of the problem. Okay? So once you've heard their perspective, their side of the problem, you've now owned your part, they have now owned their part. Then it comes to number 5. You need to request change for the situation. We have a problem. You know my perspective. I've apologized. I've heard your perspective. You may or may not have apologized. I can't control that, right? But I hear your perspective. You hear my perspective. This is a problem. What changes can we make? What changes can we make that will make this problem to where we can both live with it and have a healthy relationship moving forward? You understand, especially in marriage, that not every problem can be solved. Many times, especially in an important relationship, it's about compromise. I'll give a little here, they give a little there. My wife and I, had to do that when it came to parenting. When our kids were little, I was on one extreme, she was on the other. And so the way we became and built our parenting model is I came 50%, she came 50%. We built a pretty healthy model. We both felt uncomfortable, but the wisdom of the Lord is that two of us together feeling uncomfortable and compromising was actually a pretty good parenting model. So that's what you're going to want to do. You're going to call, you're going to request a change, and that change is a win-win. I want it to be a win for you. I want it to win for me. I don't want to get my way. I don't want you to get your way. I want to come up with a solution that we both can live with, we both feel comfortable with, so that we can move forward and have resolution to this issue and not have the resentment that builds up from not handling this. Now, let me say this. You can't compromise your integrity. If they say that the solution to the problem is a compromise of your integrity, you cannot go along with that. So that's obvious, but I just want to point that out. But you're looking for what? A win-win. And I wouldn't say, here's what we need to do. I would ask questions. What do you think we can do to help? What do you think we can do to come to the middle? Let's throw out 5 or 6 ideas and discuss them and discard them or choose one or maybe come up with a conglomerate and begin to brainstorm about how we can come to resolution for the problem. But you're always looking for a win-win, not a win-lose. That's possible if you've already dealt with your anger up front. That's very difficult to do if you're still angry. Okay, so you want a win-win. So let me just give you an example. Would you be willing to call me when you're going to be late? That would really help make a better use of my time. So if the issue is they never call and they're always late, you can suggest, hey, what about this? What about this as a compromise? Instead of us fighting about this, why don't you call me when you're not going to be on time? Communicate with me so I'll know. So it's those kinds of things that you want to do in building that win-win. Okay? Next, number 6, establish natural consequences if necessary. If you've walked into this relationship, especially with employees, we know how to do this with employees. We will set up kind of an action plan that you have to abide by. Sometimes in relationships you need that. Okay? So there might be an action plan where you have to give some natural consequences if consequences are needed for change behavior. If they're doing something in the relationship you can't live with and there has to be change behavior, you're going to have to set up some natural consequences. So here's a couple of examples. If you start demeaning me and verbally abusing me, from this point forward, I'm going to leave the conversation. See, you had a hard conversation with them because what? They were verbally abusing you. So what did you do? You had the hard conversation. Maybe they didn't agree to stop and you say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do moving forward. When you start demeaning me, I'm going to get up and leave the room until you can treat me with respect. There's a natural consequence. Okay, here's another one. When you drink or lie, I will not cover for you anymore. I've covered for you. I'm not covering for you anymore. So if you lie, I'm not covering. If you drink, I'm not covering for you. Natural consequences based on that issue. You don't want to have to go there. You want resolution where both people have a win-win, but sometimes you just can't have it. So you have to have those consequences. Number 7, return to the I am for you stance. In other words, how did you begin the conversation? Heart to heart. I love you. I care about you. I care about our relationship. I want us to have a healthy relationship. Therefore, I'm going to have a brave conversation with you. That's how you start, right? Well, when you're wrapping it up and getting toward the end, you come back to that. Remember that I love you. Remember that I care about you. Thank you for having this brave conversation with me. This was a crucial conversation for our relationship, and I appreciate it. Thank you. And you reconnect at the end, okay? You're kind of reconnecting the whole way. You never disconnect emotionally when you're having this conversation. You stay in tune. You're for them the whole time, but you really reaffirm that at the end. Not with empty platitudes, not with, over the top. Just be brief and let them know from an authentic place, man, I really appreciate this relationship and I appreciate the conversation and I do love and care about you. Thank you for this conversation. Understand that sometimes you're not going to get the resolution you want. Understand sometimes you're going to have to agree to disagree. Understand that sometimes you're going to have to set boundaries that may change the nature of your relationship based on the conversation. But the conversation is necessary for you to be healthy and for you to walk in healthy relationships. And then finally, I would just say this. Follow up in 24, 48 hours and just check on them and just say, hey, love you, appreciate the conversation. I think we're in a place now where we can move forward in a much more healthy place. Are you doing okay? Just do a heart check on them, because remember, it's more about the long-term relationship than winning the argument, right? So those are some things I want you to think about as you think about having brave and crucial conversations with people that mean a lot to you in your life. It is so easy to be conflict avoidance, and I was conflict avoidance for years, and it damages relationships, and it never brings you to the depth of what God wants you to have in your relationships. So learn to step up, learn to step forward, have those brave conversations, and I'm telling you, it will change the nature of your relationships. It will make them deeper and healthier and more godly, because remember what James said in James chapter 3, a peacemaker who sows in peace, doing this, peacemaking, will reap a harvest of righteousness. What's that righteousness? Deep, godly, abiding relationships. Hey, listen, thanks very much for listening today. I hope this helps. I hope this gives you some things that you can put in your tool belt to be good, to be a good conversationalist and good at addressing difficult issues in your life. God bless you. Have a good day.